General George, as the chief of staff of the Air Force, is well loved by soldiers across the board. He's created a culture that's very good within the U.S. Army. But he's not the only one that was reported in that statement by the New York Times yesterday. It's not only General Randy George, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, it's also General Dave Hodney, a four-star general, one of the few that are in the Army, who's in charge of Army Futures Command. And here's one that hit personally for me, which I don't know how to connect the dots on this, but the third officer mentioned was Major General Bill Green. Bill Green is the chief of chaplains in the Army. And what that means is he oversees all the moral capabilities of the chaplains in the force. And I know Bill Green. He was one of my chaplains when I was a brigade commander, and he is one of the finest officers and ministers in the Army. And that's why he was chosen as the chief of chaplains. When you have those three individuals, it tells me more of what's going on. There's all kinds of conclusions on why George was fired. But when you talk about all three of them together, it's much more damaging, and there's a whole lot more to this story. They were standing up for something. I don't know what the issue was, but when you hear Secretary Hegseth say that soldiers are fighting for Jesus, which is what he said in a speech the other day, that just chills me to the bone, especially when you have soldiers and all military personnel who are of other faiths, and it's on Passover weekend. It just doesn't make sense to me, and it's just despicable.
It's kind of the sentiment for many retired leaders in this, specifically a retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, talking about this idea that they're fighting for Jesus, but also they're also kicking out chaplains that apparently are not fighting for Jesus. It's the wrong kind of Christianity. Let me go ahead and give you guys more of a direct picture of what is that Mark Hertling was talking about there and what has him so concerned.
As the war in Iran rages on, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has ousted another senior military officer.
I, Randy George.
With more than a year left in his term, the U.S. Army's Chief of Staff General Randy George has been asked to step down by the Pentagon. No reason was provided for the dismissal.
General Randy A. George will be retiring from his position as the 41st Chief of Staff of the Army, effective immediately. The Department of War is grateful for General George's decades of service to our nation. We wish him well in his retirement.
Before becoming the U.S. Army's top uniformed officer in 2023, George served in the First Gulf War as well as Iraq and Afghanistan. He was also Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin's top military aide from 2021 to 2022 during the Biden administration. This is the latest sacking among the US military's top brass during the second Trump presidency. Others who have been removed include Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General C.Q. Brown, as well as the Chief of Naval Operations and Air Force Vice Chief of Staff. More than a dozen other top military generals and admirals have also either retired early or been removed from their posts by Hegseth.
So these retired leaders previously in the Army and also in all these other aspects of our military continue to come out and talk about how startling this really is. It's odd. They want us to believe people like Pete Drunk-Ass Hegseth rather than the folks who used to be in charge of things running this military as things get much worse.
You know, this is just more evidence that this is the greatest geopolitical disaster, I believe, in the history of America. Donald Trump has stuck his hand in the middle of a hornet's nest. He doesn't know how to get it out, and we've got a long way to go.
Brigadier General Steve Anderson, of course, also retired there too. The greatest geopolitical disaster in the history of America. Look, it gets said so smoothly and cleanly by him, and not to say that he's downplaying it, but I feel like our ears don't take it in. It goes in and then we go, oh, that was a startling thing to hear. And then we move on. We're in the middle of this war where this guy's threatening ground invasions, which he's also, by the way, threatening much larger things, which I'm going to get to. And you have people who know what they're talking about how this is potentially the worst military move that any president can make in the history of this country. Crazy how that works. Hey, here's another guy, Major General Randy Manner.
All of our military personnel are in greater risk than they have ever been before in terms of any other previous administration. We have a Secretary of Defense who has actually stated words in his speeches and in writing that are literally the words of potential war criminals. Even if the president pardons him for these things, The Hague will eventually come to get him. It's very disheartening whenever the Secretary of Defense, who we're supposed to look up to for guidance and counsel and strategy, is saying things about show no quarter, which by its quote is prohibited and defined in U.S. law as a war crime. The idea of attacking infrastructure that affects civilians is a war crime. So it goes on, and our military members start to question, what are we doing here if we're attacking, for example, a bridge under construction? It just doesn't make any sense in terms of what are the military objectives, which seem to keep changing on a regular basis. And if you don't have military objectives, and then you know when success has been achieved, that means all you're going to do is get further and further involved in this warfare, and it's going to go worse and worse for the United States and for the American public in terms of the oil prices, just as an example.
I wonder if we're supposed to believe that they've all got together on some email and decided to coordinate similar types of conclusions to these actions rather than understanding that they know what they're talking about, and maybe we should pay attention to it. The thing is, you would think, oh yeah, Jayar, you only gathered like 2 guys that decided to be these radical leftist libs that formerly a part of leading military. All it is just those guys.
Yeah, I think, the fact that the war is not going to the way that the president wants, he's getting very frustrated. That frustration gets pushed down to his secretaries, his cabinet. His cabinet then pushes back onto, the people in the rank and file. And in this particular case, the Army's doing an awful lot of stuff. There probably was an awful lot of pushback on, putting ground troops in there and, the danger of another Iraq or Afghanistan. And I don't think that's what Hegseth wanted to hear. But, the Army commander is a warrior. He's been in these places. He knows what happens when ground troops get put there. And I think, we can safely deduce that probably was part of the conversation and why he's no longer there. For the health of the Army and for the generation of forces necessary for operations, I mean, it's going to have a significant impact, because what they're saying is they want a philosophical change at the top. They probably don't want warriors. They probably want sycophants and people that will tell the Secretary of War exactly what he wants to hear.